Hey, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. God bless you all. I hope that you all have had an amazing week. Happy Resurrection Weekend. God is so good. He's always been good. He is good. He will continue to be good. And we are resuming our study on the book of Numbers. So last week we were not here. We did a rebroadcast because we were out of town. But the week before that, we started this series in Numbers. And I mentioned that it was going to be a 4-part series. So today is part 2 of this study of the book of Numbers. And I have entitled it From Complaint to Collapse. From Complaint to Collapse. Our key scripture for today is Numbers chapter 14, verse 11. Numbers chapter 14, verse 11. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? Will they never believe me, even after all the miraculous signs I have done among them?" My goodness. Listen, today we're going to be talking about how spiritual progress is often sabotaged by ourselves, by you, by me. It's so easy to put the blame on, the devil and other people, but our spiritual progress is often sabotaged by our own emotional instability, by our own shallow cravings, and by our refusal to trust God's ways. So we're going to continue to follow the Israelites in their wilderness experience here through the book of Numbers. And today we are really going to see all of this complaining that they've done. Okay, so I want to welcome you to today's study. Listen, if you're watching live, let us know who you are, where you're watching from. I always love to see people coming on in and sharing this out. Okay, be a digital evangelist, share this out to others so that they know that they can get a good word here, right? So that they can get what God would have them to get from this too. So don't keep it to yourself. Share it out or tag somebody in the comments, okay? So this is where, if you're new to this channel, I'm Pastor Lexi Johnson, and you're watching Kingdom Disciples Training Center. And this is where we expose shallow faith. This is where we dismantle religious tradition. And this is where we raise up kingdom disciples who know their Bible, who walk in power, and live what they preach. And they do that unapologetically. All right. So this is not your traditional Bible study. This is where faith gets fire tested, right? And all of the other religious fluff, well, it gets burned. Okay. That is what we're doing here. As Paul would say, there's a time you got to come off the milk and get into the meat of things, right? And so that is what we are doing. We are diving into one of the most volatile sections of Israel's wilderness journey, and we are going to witness where murmuring and complaining meets judgment, and where flesh leads to forfeiture. Forfeiture of what? Forfeiture of blessings that are promised to you. Okay. We know that Moses was instructed to go and free the people. Okay. He was to be used as a vessel so that he could free the people from Egypt. They have been freed from Egypt, but just their conditions, their surroundings right now are not the best, right? They have to go through this wilderness place, literally, physically, spiritually, before they get to the promised land. And not too long after they're in this place of wilderness, they are showing their behinds. Okay, they are absolutely showing their behinds. So we're going to be looking at chapters 11 through 20 today, chapters 11 through 20. So let's get started. Chapter 11. All right. In chapter 11, and because we're covering so many chapters, obviously we're not doing a deep dive into these chapters. I am pulling out the main themes, and then this will be great for you to just go back and do deeper study. Okay. I have been toying with the idea of doing a full-on study of November of Numbers, right? Where we go chapter by chapter. I'm not sure. Certainly, if I do that, it wouldn't be in this setting. I think I would make it, um, a Zoom um, study. I usually do some type of study once a year where we study for like 13 weeks. And so maybe possibly um, Numbers may be it, and we'll go back and cover it a lot more deeply in that setting. All right, so what do we have here in Numbers 11? Well, we've got the people complaining. And let me tell you something. They are complaining about any and everything. Okay. Verse 1 of chapter 11 starts out by saying, "Now, when the people complained," I'm reading from the New King James Version. "Now, when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, for the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some in the outskirts of the camp." Okay? Listen, God was not playing with these people, and you wouldn't either. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure at some point in your life, you have said, after all I have done for this particular person or for this group of people or for your job or wherever the case may be, right? At some point, you have said something similar, and you cannot believe that these people are complaining, that they're so ungrateful, and it annoys you. It may do more than annoy you, it may anger you, right? And so God's anger was aroused. Okay. And it says the fire of the Lord burned among them, and then some of them got burned up by that fire for their complaining. Okay. So let's look at some of the things that they were complaining about. Verse 2 says, "Then the people cried out to Moses, and when Moses prayed to the Lord, the fire was quenched." Okay, so first of all, they were complaining about just being in the wilderness, right? Can you believe it? Somewhere even saying that we would just rather go back to Egypt. They would rather go back and be slaves. That is wild. But we can't judge, because even in our situations today, um, we have some situations to where good afternoon, Minister Cheryl, good to see you. Thank you for watching all the way from North Carolina. We can't judge them too harshly, because some of us are the same way. Some of us are the same way. The Lord has delivered us from something, but because we're not comfortable in the new surroundings, whether we're just passing through those surroundings to get to the next thing, or this is the place where we're supposed to be, because it's not comfortable, because we have a fear of the unknown, we will begin to say things like, "Man, maybe I should go back." Okay. To the very place, whatever that is, a past relationship, a past job, a past, whatever the situation, we want to say, "Man, maybe I should go back there," right? I want to go back there. And the only reason that you want to go back there, the thing is, it's not the best for you. They had to know that. But they wanted to go back there. Why? Because they were comfortable. They wanted to go back there because we are attracted to our own dysfunction. And so even when it's not good for us, we will say, "No, I still rather have that, because at least I know what the situation is. At least I know what the outcomes are. In this new situation, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. And everything that I'm looking at right now is uncomfortable." Right? So they're doing all of this complaining. And so the Lord gets angry. He sends fire And now they start to cry and complain because of the fire, right? And so Moses, poor Moses, he prays on their behalf, to ask the Lord to hey, to quench the fire, and the Lord does. Now, you would think that they would be done, right? They done lost some of their people to this fire. You would think that they would be done with the complaining. But oh no, they are not. And isn't that just like us as humans, right? We complain, we even get burned by our complaining, and we will turn right back around and keep complaining. And so that's what they did. They continued to complain. Now they were starting to complain about food, right? Now the Lord had been providing them manna. Okay, so they were not hungry. They were not without. They were not malnourished. They weren't any of that, right? But I guess they just got tired of manna, right? It was the same old thing every day, and they wanted a variety, I guess. I do not know, right? And they began to complain about that. All right. So it says in verse 4, the latter part of it, that last part says, who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt. Now they're going back to, we are so attracted to our dysfunction that we know that this direction is good for us. But because the old thing looks so attractive, it feels good, it smells good, it whatever, right? We will desire to go back to it. So here they are talking about the food that they had back in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic, right? And he says, but now our whole being is dried up. There is nothing at all except this manna. Nothing at all except this manna. Okay. So, in other words, what they were saying is that what God was providing was not enough. It was inadequate, unsatisfactory. And we might say, wow, how bold of them. But listen, we do the same thing. We do the same thing in our actions. We may not necessarily in our words say it, but our actions will say so. Oh Lord, you're not moving quick enough, right? No, you wanted me to do it this way, but this way is shinier. This way looks like I'll get more attention. This way, just that's how we are. All right. It goes on to explain how, what the manna looks like. I wish I could stay there because, oh my goodness, just do a study on the manna alone, what it looks like, what it is made of, what it tastes like. Oh my goodness, such deep lessons and revelation there. But we don't have time because we're trying to go from chapter 11 all the way through 20, which means I need to pick it up, right? So they were complaining about um, what they were eating. Okay. And then, Moses is getting sick of it now too. Okay. Now he says to the Lord, why have you afflicted me? Why have you given me these people? Okay. All they do is complain. They're not, they're not grateful for anything. They just, verse 13, he says, if you treat me like this, please kill me here and now. If I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness. Okay, so Moses has had it. He has had it up to here. Now, the Lord does kind of rebuke Moses here, but he also answers his prayer because the thing was, at this point, Moses is pretty much leading them kind of on his own. And so the Lord now tells him in verse 16 to gather 70 elders, right? Consecrate them so they can be ordained, commissioned to do the work that he's doing. And so he does that. Those elders, they begin to, prophesy. And then there were a couple of others who began to prophesy, but they were not ordained as elders. And guess what? The people then began to complain about that and say, "Oh, look at these people over here. They're prophesying too." So they're complaining to Moses about it, and they're expecting Moses to have to take issue with it, because it's like, who named these just two random people out here in the field to be prophetic? And that reminds me of us today too, right? That if you are not a, traditional pastor with a church and a pulpit, or not just a pastor, any of these other titles that we have, and if this particular church didn't give you that title, man didn't give you the title or whatever, we're like, who are they to be out there doing this and that, right? And we complain about them. We complain about them to our leaders. We complain about them to whoever will listen. In the day of social media, we're all in their comments talking about who ordained you to blah, 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 right? So this is what was going on. Lots of complaining. Now, they had been begging for meat or whatever, so the Lord decided that he would send them quail. He sent them quail. He sent them quail. And yeah. He sent them quail because that they were craving other stuff. So he gave them the quail, and he also gave them judgment along with it. All right. So let's there's a Hebrew word I want to introduce to you. And it is mitonanim. Okay, I've been trying to study how to pronounce these for you. But anyway, it's MIT with the little apostrophe ONE, like the number one, NIM. And it means murmurers, okay? Murmurers, meaning complainers. So it's not just a dissatisfaction, okay? But it is a rebellious complaint against divine provision, okay? Now, some of us, we may say, oh, we don't like this or that. We might make a complaint, okay? It's one thing, make a complaint. But if you persist in the complaining, now you become a complainer. You become a murmurer. You are not just dissatisfied, but your complaining now is actually a form of rebellion. Okay. And so the people are rebelling through their complaining. Okay. And they are rebelling against who and what? They're rebelling against God. I don't know who they thought that they were rebelling against. I don't know how they did not, make the connection, right? So here's what we learn from chapter 11, that you can die in a blessing if you demand it outside of God's order. Okay. They were demanding meat. They were demanding, other meat, because meat generally means food, but they were demanding other types of meat, fish, and all that kind of stuff. They were demanding, complaining about this and complaining about that. God gave it to them, but it was outside of God's order. And so therefore, they really couldn't even enjoy the blessing. In fact, that they were getting destroyed by it. Okay. So manna despised. Manna, okay, for them was what they were eating. Manna, what I'm saying now is whatever God provides, right? When you despise it, then you are also rejecting the miracle that is going to come with it. All right, so let's move on to chapter 12. Now, in chapter 12, you've got dissension happening. That's what's going on in chapter 12. There is dissension. And guess who the dissension is from? It is not from, other people in the camp who are not related to Moses. The dissension is from those within his own family. That splash water up in my face. Anyway, the dissension is from those that are within his own family. So it was from Aaron and it was from his sister Miriam. Okay. And so what were they doing? They were talking about him, behind his back. And, they were those things like, oh, who does he think he is? Who died and made him God? All of those types of things. That's what they were doing. Thing that happens, and why typically it is your family that is the one who are complaining and murmuring and talking about you behind your back. That's because familiarity breeds contempt. Familiarity breeds contempt. What does that mean? Because they have known you, okay? They know the old you, they know all your dirty little secrets. They know your habits, whether they're, and they don't even have to be bad habits or anything like that. They just know you. Okay. And so because they know you, they begin to complain. All right. Verse 3 says, Then the Lord came down on a pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle, and he called Aaron and Miriam, and they both went forward. And now he begins to rebuke them. Okay. He rebukes them. He affirms Moses. And there were some consequences for them speaking against Moses. And essentially, it's not just speaking against Moses, but it's also speaking against God, right? Because God was the one who elevated Moses. God was. So if you have a problem with the decision, you have a problem with Moses being in leadership, and you have a problem with God. We don't make these connections, right? If you have a problem, and I'm not talking about, fake leadership, false leadership. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people who have truly been called by God. If you have a problem, right, then you have a problem with God, because God is the one who ordained them. Man may have done it too, but God is the one who ordained them. Okay. So they were rebuked. All right. And Miriam became leprous. She became leprous. And, Aaron tried to, beg that, hey, look, let this pass from her. Don't let her be leprous, because in that time you were put out of camp forever. You could not, and leprosy was not something that they had a cure for. So what God did, he didn't allow for it to go away right away. He was like, nope, 7 days. She's going to be stuck with it. She needs to be outside of the camp. And she needs to feel all of that, right? She needs to feel being outcast, being talked about, being all of those things. 7 days. And not only does she need to feel that, but she needs to go through purification. She needs to go through purification. All right. So that's what happens in chapter 12. And just because you're in the room doesn't mean that you're in authority. See, Aaron and Miriam were in the room. Okay. God had asked Aaron to assist his brother. Miriam was also to assist. They're in the room, so to speak. Okay. So I'm not talking about this physical room, but in the room, meaning in this leadership circle. But just because you're in the room doesn't mean you're in authority. And that's something that we have to learn as people of God. We're not the ones in authority. God is the authority. The Almighty Yah is the authority. Okay. We may be in the room, but he's the authority. So whomever he chooses to be the leader, whomever he chooses to do whatever work needs to be done, that's his prerogative to do so. He is sovereign and he can do that. All right. So, but just because you're in there, don't get it twisted. Okay. It doesn't mean that you're the one with authority. Just because someone has a title doesn't mean that they are the one with the authority. All right. People talking about, things that go on in our countries. We have a president, and I'm talking about any president, not just this one. They don't have the real authority. Okay. They're in the room, but they don't have the real authority. There's Congress, there's Senate, there's, all those are the people who have more authority than the president does. As kingdom citizens, those people they may have some earthly power. Okay, they doing all what they do. In the kingdom, that doesn't mean that they're the ones in authority. All right. There's a Hebrew word, ragal. It means to slander, to backbite, to spy. It comes from the same root word that means gossip and defilement. Okay. So again, you can have access to leadership like Aaron and Miriam did, but still not be trusted with God's voice. God didn't trust them with his voice. He trusted Moses. All right. Let's move on to chapters 13 and 14. Now, this past Wednesday in Wednesday Morning Manna, I covered this chapter 13 and 14 about the giants and the grasshoppers and, what all that means, right? So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it here. You can go watch this past week's Wednesday Morning Manna, where I talk about this a little more in depth. But what we have here is that 12 spies were sent to explore Canaan. Okay, so the people were making their way through the wilderness. Canaan was the promised land. It was the land of milk and honey. Okay, so 12 spies were sent to explore it. Okay, so that the people would know what's ahead, what they're getting into. All right, so they go out to explore. While they're out there, they see giants. Okay, they see giants. The Hebrew word for the word giants is Nephilim. Okay, so they see, and if you've heard that word, that term before, if you've been around in the religious space long enough, you've heard of the term the Nephilim. It means giants. Okay, so the 12 spies, they saw these giants, right? And they saw these giants and they were fearful. They were fearful. So when they came back to the camp, 10 of them reported fear, right? Yeah, it's got nice grapes and it's got, it is the land of milk and honey, but these giants don't. We don't want no part of that. Okay. These giants, they're big. We're not going to be able to fight them. We're not going to be able to take them down. They are too big. Okay. They are too big. And I just a sidebar really quickly. When you read in chapter 13, it's interesting how they talked about how they found grapes and how they had to carry the grapes, okay, between two people on a pole. Can you imagine how big those grapes must have been? How good they were? Oh my goodness. They had to carry a cluster. It was one cluster of grapes. Two people either end of a pole, and that's how they had to carry these grapes. We don't need poles, so we go buy grapes today, do we? We just walk in, we pick up a whole, bag of grapes or whatever, and that's that. But yeah, we don't we can't even fathom, right, what grapes are actually really supposed to look like. So anyway, that's a side note. All right, so the other main thing here is that they saw themselves as small and insignificant, right? Again, I spoke about this Wednesday, so I'm not going to dig too deep, but they saw themselves as small and insignificant. That's what we find in verse 33 of chapter 13. It says, "We were like grasshoppers in our own sight, And so we were in their sight. And it is written in just the order that is supposed to be written. Because they saw themselves as grasshoppers, then everyone outside of them saw them as grasshoppers as well. Okay. So 10 of the spies brought back fear reports. Two of them, Caleb and Joshua, stood in faith, and they were like, we can take this, right? We can take this. If God says we can take it, we can take it. Well, the people chose fear. The people chose fear. You know what that reminds me of today when we're watching the news and they're talking about, oh, all the planes going down, or they're talking about people having a hard time getting back into the country, or going to, or whatever the case may be. The news now is gathering all of these stories, right? Reporting after them one by one, after the other, after the other, after the other, to make it seem like now there is this influx of that stuff going on when that stuff has been happening for I don't know how long, right? What are they bringing? They're bringing reports of fear. And so when you're watching those things, what are you choosing? Are you choosing fear? Because you're like, maybe God told you, you need to go to Australia and do some work for me. But now you're seeing all the reports. You're seeing reports about planes go down, which they go down. They've been going down since they've been going up. But you're hearing all these, reports because the news is focused on it now. And so now you say, I'm not going. Right? You really have to assess whether the decision you're making is based out of fear or if it is a Holy Spirit led decision. It's possible that the Lord could be saying, not now, right? But you really have to assess whether you're making that decision out of fear or whether it's spirit led. And so the Israelites, they chose fear and they rejected the promise. Anytime you choose fear over what God has assigned you to do, then you have rejected the promise that God made you. And because they rejected the promise that God made them, God declared that they were going to be in the wilderness and wander for 40 years. Yep, they're going to be in the wilderness and wander for 40 years. Now, I don't know about you all. I don't have time, right? And so I'm trying to be more conscious of that. I'm not perfect, right? I have fears, I have, concerns, I have all of that. But I'm trying to be more conscious and say to myself, hey, are you making this decision from a place of fear? Or is this truly a spirit led decision? That's for any area of your life, your assignment, your finances, your relationships, whatever the case may be, right? Because the truth is you don't just die in the wilderness, okay? Because God said these people were never going to see the promised land. Not only were they going to wander for 40 years, but their generation was not going to see the promised land. Right? So, but here's the thing, not only were they going to die in the wilderness, they were passing on. That's what they were passing on, the fear, the complaining. That's the legacy that they were passing on to the next generation. And the next generation now had to wander in the wilderness as well because of their disobedience. See, fear is not a passive thing. Fear is generational disobedience. That's what they pass along. And that's what we pass along to our children. Things that are going on in the economy right now. People are afraid, don't know what to do. Oh, what if they cut this? What if they do that? the fear. And that's what you're passing on to the people coming behind you. We cannot do that. We can't do that. We're going to wander for 40 years in the wilderness. And the next generation will too, because that's what we're passing along, right? Okay, I really got to pick up. Chapter 15, there are some laws that are given in the middle of judgment. There's some laws that are given in the middle of judgment. So God gives laws for sacrifices, even while they're under judgment. Yeah, because here's the thing. God's standard doesn't shift just because you're now dealing with some consequences. He didn't say, okay, you got this 40 years of wandering, so all my commandments or whatever these things, they don't apply. I don't know. They still apply. Even in the midst of you living out whatever consequences, his laws still apply. All right. So they had various laws for these various different sacrifices that they had to do, for grain and drink offerings, for unintentional sin, for presumptuous sin, for violating the Sabbath, right? Then they have to wear tassels on their garments. And all of that is very interesting, you all. You should go back and read it in depth. I don't have time to pull each one of those out and discuss it. But God meant what he meant, right? In fact, there was a man who was found gathering sticks. If you read verse 32 in chapter 15, there was a man who was found gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man must surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So as the Lord commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. He had broken not just one of the other laws that Moses had put in place, but one of the 10 commandments. He was out there doing some stuff that he wasn't supposed to have been doing on the Sabbath. So again, God's standard doesn't shift, even when you are in a season of dealing with your consequences. Even when you're out of alignment, what he expects does not shift. He's not obligated to downgrade his expectations because you're having a wilderness moment. Even in your wilderness moment, you are still supposed to be following God's commands. All right. Chapter 16 talks about Korah's rebellion. Now, if you remember, Korah was part of the clan that was part of the Levites. Okay. They were part of the priestly, ministry. And then there were three, in the Levites, there were three clans. Korah was one of them. And each of those three clans had a very specific duty to fulfill, a very specific role to play in taking care of the temple, right? So these people, okay, the people of Korah, Korah himself, he led a rebellion, right? And he decided to claim that they were now all holy. Okay, he was leading this rebellion against Moses and Aaron. Now, see, Aaron about to get a lick of his own medicine because him and his sister were against Moses a little bit ago. And now you got Korah, who is leading this rebellion against Moses and Aaron. And he decided, like, they're not the only holy ones. We are all holy. Okay? We are all holy. So verse 3 says, they gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy. All the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? So when Moses heard it, he fell on his face and he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near him. That one whom he chooses, he will cause to come near to him. Do this. Take censers, Korah and all your company, put fire in them and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord chooses is the Holy One. He says, you take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi. All right. So Moses is like, all right, we'll just let God settle this issue, right? God will settle the issue. He's like, I don't have to go back and forth with you. God will settle the issue. Now, it's very interesting. If you do a word study on Korah, his name, it means to make bald. Well, when you make something bald, what happens? It means you're exposing, right? And particularly for Korah, his name, he was exposing pride, because that's what it crept up in him, was this pride, right? Oh, we're all holy. We all can do the work. We all, and God has his chosen. I'm sorry. Okay. And Korah had already been given an assignment. He just needed to do his assignment. Him and his clan, they just needed to do their assignment. Okay. So um not all spiritual uprisings are prophetic. Some of them are actually demonic. Mhm. Yeah, some of them are actually demonic in disguise. One might have picked forward and said, well, that makes sense that yeah, everybody is holy. Everybody can do what they're doing. Everybody can, it sounds good because God does give everybody gifts. You know what I'm saying? But just because he gives everybody gifts doesn't mean that he called you to do the thing that he called Moses to do. He certainly didn't call everybody to do the thing Moses was called to do. Everybody's called to do whatever God calls them to do. Right? And so it sounded good, sounded real spiritual, sounded real, sounded good, but it was demonic in disguise. Okay? Because we are all equal in value, right? And because we are all equal in value, it doesn't mean that we have equality in our assignments. We don't. And it doesn't mean that any assignment is less than another assignment. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is our assignments are diverse. What I have been assigned to do, you're not assigned to do. You're assigned to do something else, right? Even if we have the same gifts, I may be assigned to this specific area and you may be assigned to another. I may be assigned to a specific group of people. You may be assigned to another. Even if we are assigned to the same group of people, then how we carry out our assignment is still different. It's still different. Okay. So equality in value, because we are all equal in value, but that doesn't mean that we are equal in assignment. And the truth of the matter is that God did not call Korah to do the work of Moses. He did not call everybody in the camp to do Moses' work. What sense would that make? What sense would that make? Okay. So long story short, we already know uh, how the showdown turned out, right? We don't have to read it. We know how the showdown turned out. God chose Moses, period. Okay. He chose Moses. All right. Well, we got the complete, then a latter part of chapter 16, the people are complaining again. Okay. They are complaining again. They're complaining again because in the showdown, some of them got killed. Why they didn't learn the first time the fire came down, I don't know, but they didn't. And more people got killed in this showdown, right? So now they're complaining again because more people got killed in the showdown. Verse 44 in chapter 16 says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Get away from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." All right. He was about to just get rid of them, period. And then the people fell on their faces. Why does God have to get like that with them? Sometimes I ask my children the same question. You already know that this is going to be an issue. Why do you do this? Why do you make it so I have to rebuke you? You know it's coming. Why? Why are you choosing violence? Right? So anyway, Moses said to Aaron, "Take a censer, put a fire in it from the altar, put a censer on it, and take it quickly to the congregation, make atonement for them." So they had to make atonement for them. And then in chapter 17, God confirms the priesthood, okay? He confirms the priesthood. And he does that by causing Aaron's staff to bud with almonds, okay? It was like whoever's staff budded with almonds, okay? Now these staff, like they were cut off from the tree, right? And if you're cut off from the tree, how are you supposed to bear any fruit or bear any, almonds in this case or whatever, which is still bearing fruit? If it's cut off, how does it bear fruit? So God confirmed Aaron by causing his staff, okay, which is cut off from the tree, to bud with almonds. So what do we learn in chapter 17? Well, we learn that real authority bears fruit without striving. Real authority bears fruit without striving. What do I mean by that? That when God has rested his hand upon you, when he has said that this is your assignment, when he has said, that means that you're going to bear fruit, and it is not going to be this constant struggle and striving to do so. When you are out of alignment, in the wrong lane, working against the flow, it's much more of a struggle, right? If all the water is coming down this way, but you're going upstream, you're working against it, it is much more of a struggle. You have to strive that much harder. But when you are in alignment with what God has called you to do, this is not to say that it's easy, right? It's an easy walk, because it's not. But the fruit, the bearing of fruit, is not this continuous struggle. Real authority bears fruit without striving. Okay? Real authority bears fruit without striving. All right, we've got about 6 minutes. So we need to do chapters 18, 19, and 20. So in chapters 18 and 19, God reaffirms their priestly duties. Okay, so they had the showdown. Everybody should know now who is who. They've had a couple of showdowns, right? Yeah, they've had a few showdowns. So they should know who is who by now. God reaffirms the priestly duties, all right? Meaning to these three different clans. This is what you are to do. And they all had to go through purification again, because they had stepped out of alignment. And that's what we have to do, right? When we find ourselves out of alignment, now we may not have to do purification like they did their day, right? They had, for example, I'm reading in chapter 19. I'm reading verse 19. So chapter 19, verse 19. The clean person shall sprinkle the unclean on the third day, and on the seventh day, and on the seventh day he shall purify himself, wash his clothes, and bathe in water, and at evening he shall be clean. Like, we may not have to do all those steps, right? We now can, just come before the Lord. We can repent. We can fast. We can take communion. Those are different ways of, different symbols of going through purification, because purification and cleansing really is an inward work. Because you can take communion, you can do all the things, you can take these baths the way they tell you to take it in here, but the work really is done on the inside. This other stuff is just an outward symbol of what's going on the inside, right? So these priests, okay, had to purify themselves again because they had been out of alignment. They had been out of alignment. Anytime we step outside of God, we now have to go through a purification process, right? So that we can be used again. So all of the purification rituals that are mentioned in chapters 18 and 19, they point to spiritual cleansing, and they point to this restoration of reverence for the Almighty Yah, because they had been irreverent, they had been disrespectful, they had been more than disrespectful, right? So they have to get in alignment. So listen, God still holds leaders to a higher standard. Leaders are held to a higher standard. Purity still matters. Okay. Even when nobody is looking, even when it all matters. It all matters. All right, let's go to chapter 20 and we'll wrap up. So in chapter 20, Moses gets angry. And you wonder, can you blame him? You can't blame him for getting angry. In fact, the Bible says getting angry it's not the issue, right? Because anger is an emotion that God has given us. But what happened is that Moses was so angry, he let the anger consume him. He let the anger cause him to be disobedient. So why the word of God says, be angry, but do not sin, right? Moses struck a rock in his anger, and the instruction was not for him to strike the rock. The instruction was for him to speak to the rock. Listen, when God gives instructions, he means what he said. He didn't ask us to do anything, add something to it, do something different because whatever we're thinking might sound better or might be a better display or whatever the case may be, right? So Moses strikes the rock in anger instead of speaking to it. And you know what? God is no respecter of persons. Just like the Israelites of that generation were not going to see the promised land, now neither was Moses. All of that work in one moment of disobedience, now he was denied entry into the promised land. Chapter 20, verse 12 says, "But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness, you will not lead them into the land I am giving them." That is so crazy, right? So what do we learn from that? We learn that our past obedience doesn't cancel present disobedience. Because Moses had been obedient all through that time, didn't cancel the fact that he was now disobedient in that moment. And isn't it interesting that, when you hear court cases or They don't even have to be court cases, but maybe there is a hearing on your job or wherever in the community, whatever. And you will hear people speak about, well, please take into consideration their 45 years of doing good. Your past obedience doesn't cancel present disobedience. In the courtroom, on this earth, it might work, but with God, it does not work. It does not work. You have to face the consequences, right? And we also learn from Moses that you can lead people. You've been given this assignment to lead. You can lead these people and still miss the promise if you lead from emotion instead of obedience. We cannot be led by emotion. And that's what happened to Moses. He was led by emotion in that one moment, in that one instance. And we cannot be led by emotion. We have to be led by obedience. All right. So, what did we learn today? Complaining is a spiritual cancer. Okay. And God takes murmuring and complaining personally. If you want a quick way to collapse, complain. Familiarity with leadership is dangerous, right? Just because you are near leadership doesn't give you permission, right? Just because you're in the room doesn't give you permission. Just doesn't think just because you're in there now you think you can do, and you might be able to do it, but were you called to do it? Fear will cancer destiny. So it's not just feeling scared, it's that you rebel because you're feeling scared. Really, that's all the problem. That's the problem. That was the problem. That was the foundational problem for the people of Israel. They were scared. They were scared of the unknown. But that feeling of being scared, instead of just checking it where it was, they let it consume them and then it became rebellion, right? We also learn that God doesn't negotiate holiness, right? That his standards stay the same no matter what. We also learn that rebellion never ends well. So Korah is the poster child for that, right? Because he's like, we're all holy. We're all, this, that, or the other. Don't end well. Stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. You're doing anything outside of that, you're rebelling. And it doesn't end well. Because we learn, some of their people died, okay, in that showdown. And then finally, emotions don't excuse disobedience. I was angry. That's why I did it. Some people say, okay, you were angry. Being angry made it okay. No, it does not, right? Even Moses did not get a pass. He led the people all that time. And he was not going to see the promised land. Okay. So that is Numbers chapter 11 through 20. That was quite a bit, right? Next week, we'll be in Numbers again, and we'll take up several chapters again. It would be great for you to study beforehand. So I would say study from 20 to from 20 to 30. And be ready next week when we come, because like I said, I can't do deep dives. I can only pull out just some of the main lessons. And really my ultimate goal with this book of Numbers is to show people that you're missing out if you're not reading the book of Numbers. A lot of us don't read the book of Numbers because we think it's just a lot of names, it's a lot of laws, and it doesn't apply to us today. And it very much applies to us today. All right. So, that is it. I want to remind you all that my book, Stop Begging God for Money, it launched this past Wednesday. I'm so excited about that. So make sure that you get your copy. The should be in the description. Yes, it's in the description. Okay. You can get it from my personal website, particularly if you would like to have it personalized. So that's where I autograph it and I write a personalized note to you there's a scripture card that comes with that. So if you would like that, then you want to order it from our personal website. I would prefer you order it from our personal website, period. If you know, you know. Okay. But if not, you can also order it from Amazon. It is on Amazon. And we praise God that it has been on the bestseller list since Wednesday. Even today, it's still on the bestseller and hot new release list. So that is all. We will see you Wednesday morning for Wednesday morning manna, and then back here next Sabbath where we'll continue our study in the book of Numbers. God bless.